I still remember the first time I pulled into Willow Creek Estates with my trailer hitched behind my old pickup. It wasn't much to look at, just a modest white trailer with dented aluminum siding and a hand-painted mailbox I'd crafted myself. It wasn't luxury, but it was honest. It was mine. After years of working 2 jobs and sleeping in basements, I'd finally carved out a piece of life I could call home. I didn't need much, just peace. But peace was the last thing I found. The moment my tires touched their perfect asphalt roads, I felt their eyes. The kind that didn't just see you, judged you. Behind those manicured lawns and identical brick facades, people stood still, clutching coffee mugs and peering over hedges, whispering, staring, like I had dragged in mud across their perfect white floors. I parked near the plot I had legally rented through a private agreement. It was a side lot, not technically part of the HOA, though it shared the road. I began to unhitch when I heard it, the laughter, a tall man in a golf shirt, arms crossed. 2 women by his side, one holding a fluffy dog. The man shook his head and smirked, loud enough for me to hear. "This isn't a campground, buddy." "You might be lost," I forced a polite smile. "No, I'm right where I'm supposed to be." They exchanged looks. Then the blonde woman, pearl earrings, cold eyes, chimed in. "This is Willow Creek Estates. We don't do trailers." I felt heat climb my neck, but I held back. "I have permission from the owner of this land." "I won't be any trouble," she scoffed. "You already are." That night I sat inside my trailer, boxed in by towering houses with glowing windows. I could almost feel them watching, waiting for me to leave. But I wasn't leaving. I had worked too hard to finally sleep under a roof, even if it was made of tin. Days passed, and the snickers became stares. The stares became murmurs. Every morning, as I stepped out with my coffee, someone would be walking a dog or checking their mail. Paused, eyes narrow, I kept my head down, fixed my steps, painted my porch rail, tightened screws, planted flowers in an old oil drum I turned into a planter. I wasn't trying to impress them. I was building my peace. But peace didn't last. It was a quiet Thursday morning when a black SUV pulled up. A man stepped out with a badge clipped to his belt and a file folder in hand. HOA. Of course. He approached with a smile that never touched his eyes. "Morning. I'm Harold Graham, president of the Willow Creek HOA. We've had concerns. I repeated. "Yes, this isn't appropriate housing for our community image. Some neighbors feel your vehicle brings down property value. Vehicle." He wouldn't even call it a home. I kept calm. "I'm not on HOA land. I rent this plot through Mr. Jenkins. I have a signed contract." He nodded slowly, like he was humoring a child. "Be that as it may, we have aesthetic standards. Your structure violates community harmony." Community harmony. I almost laughed. "With respect, sir, I'm not under your HOA authority." He slipped a paper into my hand. "We'll see about that. Fine notice. $250. Reason: unsightly structure. Visual disruption." That night, I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at that notice under the warm glow of a single hanging bulb. Outside, I heard footsteps, faint whispers, then laughter fading down the road. They thought they could chase me out with shame. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I woke early and stepped outside with a cup of coffee. A woman across the street froze the moment she saw me, pretended to check her flowers. I looked around at the neighborhood. Perfect fences, polished driveways, wine chimes humming in expensive breezes. They believed I didn't belong here, but they had no idea who they were dealing with, because I had nowhere else to go. And when a man has nothing left to lose, he learns how to fight. A week later, I found another notice taped to my door. Cease and desist. Remove trailer within 14 days or face legal action. Signed, Willow Creek HOA. I crumpled it slowly. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I saw them gathered on the clubhouse patio, wine glasses in hand, laughing. At me? Maybe. Probably. A fire ignited inside me, quiet but fierce. I didn't confront them. I didn't yell. I made a promise. I will not leave. I will not run. And I will not forget, little did I know, they were about to cross a line that would change everything. A line that would bring blue lights flashing into Willow Creek. A line that would turn neighbors into enemies and everything they mocked into the very thing they feared. Because humiliation is one thing, but when they tried to take my home, that's when I started building something far stronger. I used to believe that people only became cruel when they felt threatened. But the folks in Willow Creek weren't threatened by me. They were entertained by me. I was their morning gossip, their smirking topic over wine. A trailer in their kingdom. It was nothing short of spectacle. I would have ignored it all, swallowed my pride, and carried on quietly, if they had just left me alone. But they didn't. It started with petty harassment. Someone left a glossy HOA pamphlet in my mailbox with sections highlighted. All homes must adhere to architectural harmony and approved aesthetic values. They even circled the words, permanent structure. A clear message, you don't belong. I shrugged it off. I had thicker skin than they knew, but it escalated. First came the noise. Every night a car would drive slowly past, music blaring, headlights sweeping across my windows. Once someone honked repeatedly at midnight, then sped off laughing. My dog, Rusty, an old hound I'd rescued years back, would bark frantically, trembling beside my bed. Then came the trash. A crumpled soda can, a bag of lawn clippings, even a broken rake appeared beside my steps one morning. Little reminders that I wasn't welcome. Yet I held my ground. One morning, while repairing a gutter on my roof, I heard voices across the road. Mrs. Harrow and another woman, leaning over a hedge, watching me like I was an exhibit. I heard his kind never stays long, one whispered. If the HOA doesn't get him out, we'll make sure he leaves, the other replied. His kind. I pretended not to hear, but inside something cracked. Not anger, resolve. That afternoon I went to see Mr. Jenkins, the retired man who owned the land I rented. He lived a mile down the road, on a quiet patch near the river. A good man. Gruff, but fair. I won't lie to you, he said, leaning on his cane. They've called me 3 times this week. They're pressing me to evict you. I felt my stomach drop. Do you want me gone? He shook his head. Boy, I don't bend for bullies. Your rent's paid, and your contract stands. You stay as long as you need, I nodded, grateful. They won't stop, his eyes narrowed. Then you don't stop either. That night I tightened every bolt, reset my fence post, and patched paint on the siding. I wasn't going anywhere. But Willow Creek wasn't done. 3 days later, it happened. I came home from the hardware store to find a police cruiser waiting at my lot. Blue and red lights flashing silently in the fading daylight. A uniformed officer stood beside Harold Graham, the HOA president. Harold had a folded paper in hand, smug as ever. Rusty barked as I stepped out of my truck. Sir, the officer said calmly, we received a complaint about an illegal dwelling. Illegal? I repeated, stunned. This is private land. I rent it legally. Harold stepped forward. We believe he's violating county zoning. Trailers attract unwanted issues. The officer's tone remained controlled. Do you have documentation of your lease? I pulled it from my glove box and handed it over. He studied it carefully, nodding. This appears valid. Harold's jaw tightened. This isn't about paperwork. This is about community standards. He's depreciating our neighborhood. Depreciating. As if I was rust on their gates. The officer looked between us. He's done nothing unlawful. If you have further dispute, take it to civil court, not emergency services. Harold's eyes burned, but he said nothing. As the cruiser pulled away, he leaned toward me. You think a piece of paper protects you? You're a guest here. We'll make sure you're gone. I didn't answer. I watched him walk away, shoulders stiff with wounded pride. And that was my breaking point. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rusty paced the floor. I sat at my small table staring at the lease agreement. Their laughter, their trash, their lies, and now the police. They wanted war. But I wasn't going to fight with fists, or even words. I was going to fight with patience, with silence, with something far more powerful than hatred. Knowledge. The next morning, I went to the county records office, a small, dusty building with buzzing lights and shelves full of property maps. I dug through files, tracing land plots and old deeds. Most of it meant nothing to me until I saw Parcel 78B Willow Creek Clubhouse. Community pool. Fitness center. All sitting on a parcel marked privately owned land. Tax lien pending. My eyes widened. It didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to a private seller. And it was for sale. Quietly, through a third-party listing. I felt a slow, dangerous calm settle over me. They thought I was temporary, a nuisance, a stain. They had no idea. I had just found the foundation under their castle. As I walked out of that records office, the sun felt different, warmer, brighter. I looked toward Willow Creek, those perfect houses glinting in the distance, and I didn't feel small anymore. I felt ready. They wanted me gone. I was about to become unforgettable. Most people think revenge happens in fire and fury, in shouting matches, slamming doors, and righteous outrage. But real revenge? The kind that shakes the ground beneath your enemy's feet? It doesn't roar. It whispers. After discovering Parcel 78B, the land under the Willow Creek Clubhouse wasn't owned by the HOA, I went back to my trailer with my mind burning. Every humiliation, every smirk, every trash bag thrown at my door. They all suddenly had a purpose. I didn't just want to survive them anymore. I wanted to own the ground beneath their pride. Days became routine. Morning coffee on my porch, evening walks with Rusty. Silent nods to the few neighbors who dared to look my way. To them, I was still the trailer man, still beneath their notice. But behind my calm eyes, I was building something they couldn't see. I returned again and again to the county courthouse, learning how land changes hands, how taxes work, how debt silently erodes even the strongest walls. I learned that the current owner of 78B was an elderly investor who had left the state. The property was behind on taxes, quietly slipping toward auction. Most people would have seen legal jargon. I saw opportunity. One morning, while reviewing documents in the courthouse hallway, I heard two familiar voices. "He's still there," Mrs. Harrow muttered. "Trash like that never leaves unless you push it," someone replied. They hadn't seen me. I watched them disappear around the corner, clutching HOA binders like holy books. I didn't follow. I just whispered under my breath, "Keep pushing." That week, Harold Graham, the HOA president, made his next move. I came home to find a bright orange sticker slapped across my door. Notice of eviction. Remove unauthorized residents within 10 days or face forcible removal. They couldn't evict me. They had no authority, but they were counting on fear. That night, as rain pattered against the roof, I sat with the notice under dim light. Rusty rested at my feet, eyes full of worry only a loyal dog can show. "I'm not going anywhere, boy," I murmured. "Not until I'm done." I decided it was time to gather proof. The next day, I recorded everything. The notices, the fines, even the time-stamped voicemail from Harold saying, "Men like you drag us down. Leave before we make you." I gathered it all into a neat folder. Not for a fight. For insurance. Then I called the tax office and made an appointment to discuss the purchase of Parcel 78B. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a warm voice, studied the file in front of her. "You understand," she said carefully, "this property includes a standing structure used by a private association." "I understand," I replied. "You intend to buy it fully? No development partnership?" "Fully," she hesitated. "It won't be cheap," I leaned forward. "Neither is dignity. But I didn't have a fortune. I wasn't a businessman. What I did have was time, discipline, and years of savings from long days and lonely work. I cashed an old retirement bond, sold tools, took extra work shifts. Quietly, slowly. I never told a soul what I was doing. Every signature, every wire transfer, every legal stamp, it felt like laying bricks in a fortress no one else could see, no fireworks. No boasts, just preparation. Meanwhile, the HOA tightened its grip. Someone spray-painted "Go Home" on my trash can. My mailbox was knocked down twice. One morning, I found Rusty's leash cut clean through where it hung by the door. That one nearly broke me. I stood there on the steps, gripping the torn leash until my knuckles turned white. They had crossed from insult into malice. But that was their mistake. They thought they were wearing me down. They had no idea. They were forging me. 3 weeks later, I signed the final document. Parcel 78B, Transfer of Ownership. In the eyes of the law, I had become the legal owner of the land beneath their clubhouse, their pool, their pride. It was mine. I drove back to Willow Creek that evening as dusk fell. The clubhouse lights glowed warmly in the distance, shadows of residents laughing inside, glasses raised high. They were celebrating. They didn't know what they were standing on. I parked beside my trailer, stepped out, and took a long breath of cool night air. For the first time since arriving here, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like the hidden heartbeat beneath their pavement. I didn't strike that night. Or the next. I waited. I watched. I let them keep digging their own grave with their arrogance, and with every passing day, I refined my plan. Because you don't just hurt people like them. You educate them. I waited until the timing felt right, not because I loved the theatrics, far from it, but because there's a particular kind of satisfaction in letting people sit comfortably in ignorance before you remove the rug from under them. For weeks, they went about their routines: tennis at dawn, Pilates by the pool, wine on the clubhouse patio. They called meetings, complained about community standards, and sent polite-looking notices that felt like punches. When I finally acted, it wasn't fury that guided me. It was simple, cold practicality. I hired a small-town attorney. Quiet, efficient, the kind of man who'd never shout from a podium but knew exactly which papers to file. He drafted the documents I needed: formal notice of title transfer, notice to vacate for trespass, and a carefully worded letter explaining that, effective immediately. The parcel commonly referred to as Parcel 78B was under new private ownership and that the previous possession arrangements were no longer valid. I remember printing that first copy and feeling an odd rush, less like triumph and more like relief. Relief, because whatever happened next would happen fairly. All those nights of humiliation were finally going to be met with something they couldn't brush off as just neighborhood squabbling. This was law, not gossip. The morning I placed the official envelopes on the HOA president's desk and slid a copy under the clubhouse door, the air tasted like iron. I walked to the clubhouse under a sky that threatened rain. The gardenias near the entrance smelled impossibly sweet, as if the world wanted to remain pleasant while everything changed. Harold was the first to notice me. He stood at the door with a clipboard, like a guard at the gates. His face stiffened when he saw the envelope in my hand. "What is this?" he asked, voice tight. "A notice," I said. "You'll want to read it." He tore it open with the practiced impatience of someone used to getting his own way. His eyes flicked over the letter, then over the county seal, then to me. For a moment, his smugness wavered. "You can't," he started. "I can," I interrupted gently. "I bought the land." "I own it now," he bristled. "You bought it? That parcel? That's ours. We've maintained the clubhouse for years." "You maintained a building on land owned by someone else," I said. "That someone else's contract expired or lapsed. I stepped in and purchased the parcel through legal channels. I gave you notice so we can settle things professionally." More residents had come out by now, drawn by a murmur I could feel rolling toward me like distant thunder. Mrs. Harrow pressed her palms to her chest, scandalized. "This is preposterous," she whispered. "He can't just take what's ours." "That is not how ownership works," I replied. "If your association had a valid recorded lease, it would be different. As far as the county records show, you do not." A ripple ran through them, confusion, then anger. People began to shout over one another. Accusations and years of entitlement tumbling into a chaos only the insecure could create when their foundations are threatened. Harold moved toward me. "We'll call the county. This is illegal. You've got to be joking." I met his eyes without flinching. "Call who you want. I'll show them the deed. I'll show them the transfer. There's a difference between noise and ownership." He said it again. "You can't just—" Before he finished, a patrol car rolled slowly up the street. I felt in my bones the change of tempo. The sound of an engine has this way of turning a crowd into a stage. A deputy stepped out, Deputy Morales, known around town for his even temper and thicker patience. He approached with hands in his pockets, eyes moving over the people clustered like birds on a wire. "You folks call about a disturbance?" he asked. Harold wasted no time. "This man is trying to evict the clubhouse." Deputy Morales glanced at the letter in my hand. His expression didn't change much. He read the words like a man reading a recipe. "I don't make civil rulings," he said quietly. "If there's a dispute over ownership or a lease, you'll need to take it to civil court. But I'm here because someone called and said there might be a scene." "What we want," Harold declared, "is for him to leave." "He doesn't have an order to leave," Morales replied. "You'll need a court order for that. If you lack one and try to force people out, that becomes a different problem," the crowd muttered. People glanced at me, at the deputy, then at one another. Some of the younger homeowners looked suddenly uncertain. They'd always preferred to follow the louder voice in the room. Those louder voices suddenly felt less loud. Harold's smile was brittle. "We'll take care of it," he said, too low for the crowd. But the reality had settled. The sheriff's deputy had drawn a clear line. Civil matters like evictions and leases are handled in court. Police are there to keep the peace, but not to take sides in property disputes without an order. As the deputy disengaged, I felt the collective attention turn on me like a spotlight. Faces were strained, suspicion carved into the lines around mouths. Mrs. Harrow folded her arms, lips pressed so tight I thought they might pop. Later, in the privacy of my trailer, I read the reactions like a map. Some were angry. Some were plotting. A handful, mostly younger couples or residents who'd always felt uneasy with the HOA's hard edges, came by with eyes that carried small, apologetic smiles. "We didn't know," one woman said, wringing her hands. "We thought it was HOA land." I nodded, grateful and cautious. "It's complicated." Then the threats started. Anonymous notes taped to my door, thin, childish handwriting promising consequences. Someone slashed the tire on my pickup one night. A careful, cowardly job that screamed of malice more than skill. The police took a report. Deputy Morales came by again, this time with a different look. Less procedural, more human. "We'll patrol more often," he said. "But for anything else, document everything and talk to your attorney." I did. I documented, I filed. I kept a folder with every tacky notice, every spiteful message, every trespass. I didn't want to humiliate them in public. I wanted something cleaner. Final. There was one late afternoon when the sky split open and the first real thunder cracked. I stood at the edge of my lot and watched the clubhouse lights pull inside, faces like moths to a bulb. I pictured them living there, laughing, hosting dinners on floors that sat above the land I now owned. I imagined the sick twist on their faces when the first official notice of trespass arrived, when the legal clock started to tick and they realized that their entitlement didn't come with an eternal lease. Still, I held back. I wanted the moment to be irrevocable, not simply reactionary. I wanted them to have time to choose, leave with dignity, or fight and make everything worse. That night, as rain drove against the trailer metal and Rusty curled against my feet, I listened to the distant sounds of porch lights and polite conversations. Voices unaware that the ground beneath their feet had changed hands. I thought about how strange it was to be the calm center in a world that had only ever known my supposed chaos. They mocked my trailer. Now, they had to reckon with the truth. The joke had a punchline, and I was the one writing it. There's a strange silence that comes before a storm. Not the peaceful kind, but the tense, held breath of something inevitable. By the time I sent the formal notice to vacate to the Willow Creek HOA, that silence had settled over the neighborhood like a heavy fog. I remember slipping the stamped envelopes into the outgoing mail slot at the post office. Calm. Steady. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. The letter was simple, legally sound. As lawful owner of Parcel 78B, you are hereby notified that all unauthorized use of said property must cease within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in legal proceedings for trespass and damages. No emotion. No insults. Just cold, clean law. I knew when the letters arrived. You could feel it, like a sharp change in the wind. It was a Saturday morning. Sunlight poured over their pristine lawns. Couples walked dogs. Sprinklers ticked in rhythm. And then, splinters in the calm. The first scream shattered it. From across the street I saw Harold stumble out of his house, envelope in hand. Face flushed a furious crimson. He rounded up 2 board members and stormed toward the clubhouse. Others followed, clutching the same cream envelope, confusion giving way to panic. I stayed on my porch, coffee in hand, not hiding, but not interfering. I watched as the mighty HOA council huddled behind glass doors, voices rising, fists slamming tables. Their clubhouse, my land now, became a cage of disbelief. By noon, their outrage boiled over. Harold marched straight to my lot, flanked by 3 others, including Mrs. Harrow, who looked as if she'd swallowed lemon juice. "You've gone too far," Harold spat, waving the notice. "You think you can scare us with this nonsense?" I met his gaze calmly. "It's not nonsense. It's property law. You've been operating facilities on privately owned land without a lease. Now that I own it, I'm giving you notice to vacate." "We built that clubhouse," he snapped. "We maintained it. We invested hundreds of thousands, and none of that changes the land title," I said. "Structures don't override deeds. You should know that. You're HOA president, after all." A murmur rose from onlookers gathering behind him. Neighbors, people who once looked at me as an intruder, now watched Harold as if waiting for answers he no longer had. "This community will not bow to a trailer dweller," sneered Mrs. Harrow. I took a slow breath. "I am not asking you to bow. I'm asking you to follow the very laws you've used against others." There it was, a flicker of realization in their eyes. They recognized something for the first time. I had never been beneath them. I had simply been silent. That evening, chaos erupted in the HOA ranks. Emergency meetings, shouting matches, accusations flying like darts. Some residents blamed Harold for negligence. Others insisted I must have cheated. A few, very few, quietly admitted the truth. He played by the rules. We just never believed he could. 2 days later, they made a desperate move. They called another police intervention. I was sitting on my steps, Rusty at my side, when the patrol car pulled up. Deputy Morales again. Same calm eyes, same measured steps. This time, he wasn't coming to warn me. He approached the HOA group gathered at the curb. Harold stepped forward, voice shaking. "He's extorting us." "He forged documents." Morales lifted a hand. "Harold, I checked the county records myself. The deed is real. The transfer is legal." Murmurs, gasps. Someone dropped their keys. Then Morales turned to me. "Sir, are you pursuing civil eviction?" "If they refuse a lease agreement, yes," I replied. "They can remain, under new terms. But they are no longer in control." Those words echoed down the street like thunder rolling over rooftops. No longer in control. The very next morning, I drafted the lease proposal. I didn't want to destroy Willow Creek. I wanted to reform it. To show them that power wasn't about pride, it was responsibility. I offered them the chance to stay, to operate their clubhouse. Under me, rent due monthly, rules revised, authority reversed. When I delivered that document, Harold refused to touch it. His hands stayed clenched at his sides, shaking with rage. "You expect us to pay you?" he hissed. "No," I said quietly. "I expect you to understand what it feels like to be under someone else's rules." The board was split. Some wanted to fight in court. Others wanted to negotiate. But there was no disguising the truth anymore. Their signatures had sent eviction letters. Mine carried authority. For the first time, the HOA had no power over someone, and that someone was the man they once tried to evict. In the days that followed, the neighborhood changed. People who had never spoken to me stopped by my fence. Some apologized. Some just nodded silently. A young couple even brought over a plate of cookies with a note. "For what it's worth, we're glad you stayed." Not everyone softened. Rage still churned in certain corners. But rage is powerless against a deed. At night, the clubhouse lights burned late as they argued, panicked, recalculated their future. I lay in my bed, listening to the wind against the trailer walls, not with worry, but with peace. They had mocked me because they believed I was temporary. But they were the ones standing on borrowed ground. And now, the ground had spoken. Morning in Willow Creek had always carried a false serenity. Neatly trimmed hedges, golden sunlight over quiet cul-de-sacs, the illusion of perfection. But now, beneath that glossy surface, something had cracked. Fear, uncertainty, a shiver in the bones of a neighborhood once convinced of its own invincibility. Word had traveled fast. The man in the trailer now owned the land beneath their pride. On the third morning after the eviction notice, I walked calmly toward the HOA clubhouse, my clubhouse, lease documents tucked under my arm. I took the same path they once banned me from using. No one stopped me this time. Eyes watched from porches and curtains. Whispers rippled through the air like shifting leaves. They were holding an emergency vote. Inside, the board sat around a polished mahogany table, faces tight with exhaustion. For the first time, there were no smug smiles, no folded arms of superiority, only accusation and blame. Harold was at the head, eyes bloodshot. Beside him sat Diane, treasurer, Keller, secretary, and two new faces I'd never seen at a board meeting before, residents who had forced their way in when the old guard faltered. When I stepped inside, silence fell like a dropped curtain. "You're not invited," Harold growled. I set the lease packet on the table. "You're using my building. I don't need an invitation." "Let's get one thing clear," said Diane, voice steady but brittle. "Are you evicting the HOA?" "No," I replied. "I'm offering terms. You may continue to use the facilities, under lease. Monthly rent, revised rules, my oversight on all property enforcement," her brows knit. "You're taking over?" "I'm doing what you did to others," I said evenly. "Control through contract. Except I won't misuse it." A murmur rippled through the room. Shock, disbelief, a dawning comprehension. Harold pushed to his feet, slamming his fist on the table. "This is blackmail." "No," I said calmly. "It's business. Something you understand when it benefits you." His chest heaved. "You think these people will ever accept you? That they'll live under your thumb?" I stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "I don't need their acceptance. I only need what I own to be respected." Then something unexpected happened. Keller, who had been silent, cleared his throat. He was older, quiet, the kind who never argued at meetings but always voted with the majority. "You forged this?" he asked gently. "No." "You tricked someone?" "No," he nodded slowly. "Then it's legal." Those words, simple, quiet, broke something in Harold. Rage twisted across his face. "You can't side with him." Keller stared at him, tired eyes sharp. "I'm siding with reality. We can be tenants, or trespassers." Harold's leadership crumbled in that moment. Somewhere behind the walls of that clubhouse, a new order began to take root. 2 hours later, the vote was cast 3-2 in favor of negotiating lease terms. Harold's gavel never fell again after that day. That evening I stood alone on the hill overlooking the clubhouse. No victory celebration, no gloating, just the quiet satisfaction of something deeper, justice without violence, power without cruelty. The sunset spilled amber light across the rooftops, touching the world that once rejected me. I thought of my father's words long ago. A man doesn't have to raise his voice to be heard. He just has to own the ground he stands on. I finally understood. Days passed. Residents began to approach me, not as an enemy but with cautious curiosity. An elderly woman brought me a potted plant. A teenager helped paint my fence. A young mother whispered, "Thank you for not tearing us down." They didn't know I'd never wanted to destroy Willow Creek. I only wanted to stand within it without being stepped on. And so, I became something I never imagined. Not a rebel, not a victim. The landlord. The silent judge of those who once judged me. The HOA would meet again soon. Under my roof. By my permission. I folded the final lease agreement and set it aside. I didn't just win land. I won my voice. Some stories don't end with thunder. Some end with a quiet truth no one can run from. After the lease terms were settled and the HOA board reshaped, life in Willow Creek took on a strange stillness. People walked slower. Conversations lowered when I passed. Not in fear, at least not anymore, but in realization. They were adjusting to a world they never believed possible. One where the man in the trailer wasn't beneath them, but above, watching over the very system that had once cast him aside. But there was still one thing left unfinished. Harold. He had vanished from meetings, ignored notices, and whispered poison throughout the neighborhood. He called me a fraud, a thief, a destroyer. But beneath all that anger, I sensed something else. Humiliation he couldn't swallow. One late afternoon, I found him where I knew prideful men retreat when they're cornered. Alone, at the edge of the empty pool behind the clubhouse. The same pool he once barred my niece from using. He didn't hear me at first. His shoulders were slumped, suit wrinkled, tie hanging loose. When he turned, there was no fire left in his eyes. "So," he muttered, "are you here to throw me out?" "Landlord." I stepped forward steady. "No, I didn't come to kick a man who's already down." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Why not? It's what I would have done to you." "I know," I said quietly. "That's the difference between us." He stared at me, broken pride etched deep into his features. "You ruined me," he whispered. I shook my head. "You ruined yourself. I just stopped you from ruining others." For the first time, Harold looked away, not in defiance but in understanding. The weight of years, decisions, arrogance seemed to collapse on him at once. He rubbed his forehead, voice strained. "I thought control meant respect." "No," I replied. "Control buys fear. Respect has to be earned." His lips trembled, but he said nothing. A single patrol car pulled up to the curb nearby. Not for me. Not with sirens or cuffs. Just an officer delivering documents. A legal motion to remove Harold from the board, signed by residents, not me. The very people who once cheered him, now demanding his resignation. The officer approached. "Mr. Grant, this is for you." Harold accepted the envelope with shaking hands. No fight left. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "I suppose this is the part where you tell me to leave." I shook my head. "No, I'm not ordering you anywhere. But the neighborhood is done following you." He stood, unsteady, decades of authority slipping from his grip like sand. As he walked past me, he paused, just long enough to say the last thing I ever expected to hear. "I never hated your home," he murmured. "I hated that you never bowed." I met his gaze. "I never needed to." He nodded once. Not approval, not apology, just recognition. And then he left. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek began to heal. The HOA council was rebuilt, not by power but by volunteers, residents who wanted fairness, not control. I attended the first meeting in silence, sat in the back row, and listened as new voices spoke. Real voices. Human ones. They asked me if I wanted a seat on the board. I smiled. No. I already have the only seat I ever needed. One quiet evening, I returned to my trailer, the same metal walls they once mocked. I stepped inside, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat by the window that overlooked the cul-de-sac. I didn't upgrade it. I didn't move. Because this home had never been a symbol of shame. It was proof that a person's worth isn't measured in square footage. It's measured in how firmly they stand when the world tries to push them down. As the sun set over Willow Creek, I thought of every letter, every fine, every laugh at my expense. They thought they could bury me, but they never realized I was the land.